Dark Night of the Soul. By St. John the Cross. Book 1. Chapter 4. The Imperfections of Lust, the third capital vice, usually found in beginners. 1. A number of these beginners have many more imperfections in each vice than those I am mentioning. But to avoid prolixity, I am omitting them and touching on some principal ones, that are as it were the origin of the others. As for the vice of lust, aside from what it means for spiritual persons, to fall into this vice, since my intent is to treat of the imperfections, that have to be purged by means of the dark night, spiritual persons have numerous imperfections, many of which can be called spiritual lust, not because the lust is spiritual, but because it proceeds from spiritual things. It happens frequently that in a person's spiritual exercises themselves, without the person being able to avoid it, impure movements will be experienced in the sensory part of the soul, and even sometimes when the spirit is deep in prayer, or when receiving the sacraments of penance or the Eucharist. These impure feelings arise from any of three causes outside one's control. 2. First, they often proceed from the pleasure human nature finds in spiritual exercises. Since both the spiritual and the sensory part of the soul receive gratification from that refreshment, each part experiences delight according to its own nature and properties. The spirit, the superior part of the soul, experiences renewal and satisfaction in God, and the sense, the lower part, feels sensory gratification and delight because it is ignorant of how to get anything else, and hence takes whatever is nearest, which is the impure sensory satisfaction. It may happen that while a soul is with God in deep spiritual prayer, it will conversely passively experience sensual rebellions, movements, and acts in the senses, not without its own great displeasure. This frequently happens at the time of communion. Since the soul receives joy and gladness in this act of love, for the Lord grants the grace and gives himself for this reason, the sensory part also takes its share, as we said, according to its mode. Since, after all, these two parts form one suppositum, each one usually shares according to its mode in what the other receives. As the philosopher says, whatever is received according to the mode of the receiver. Because in the initial stages of the spiritual life, and even more advanced ones, the sensory part of the soul is imperfect, God's Spirit is frequently received in this sensory part, with this same imperfection. Once the sensory part is reformed through the purgation of the dark night, it no longer has these infirmities. Then the spiritual part of the soul, rather than the sensory part, receives God's Spirit, and the soul thus receives everything according to the mode of the Spirit. 3. The second origin of these rebellions is the devil. To bring disquietude and disturbance on a soul, when it is praying, or trying to pray, he endeavors to excite impure feelings in the sensory part. And if people pay any attention to these, the devil does them great harm. Through fear, some souls grow slack in their prayer, which is what the devil wants, in order to struggle against these movements, and others give it up entirely, for they think these feelings come while they are engaged in prayer, rather than at other times. And this is true, because the devil excites these feelings, while souls are at prayer instead of when they are engaged in other works, so that they might abandon prayer. And that is not all. To make them cowardly and afraid, he brings vividly to their minds foul and impure thoughts. And sometimes the thoughts will concern spiritually helpful things and persons. Those who attribute any importance to such thoughts, therefore, do not even dare look at anything, or think about anything, lest they thereupon stumble into them. These impure thoughts so affect people who are afflicted with melancholia, that one should have great pity for them. Indeed, these people suffer a sad life. In some who are troubled with this bad humor, the trial reaches such a point that they clearly feel that the devil has access to them, without their having the freedom to prevent it. Yet some of these melancholiacs are able through intense effort and struggle, to forestall this power of the devil. If these impure thoughts and feelings arise from melancholia, individuals are not ordinarily freed from them, until they are cured of that humor, unless they enter the dark night, which in time deprives them of everything. 4. The third origin from which these impure feelings usually proceed, and wage war on the soul, is the latter's fear of them. The fear that springs up at the sudden remembrance of these thoughts, caused by what one sees, is dealing with, or thinking of, produces impure feelings without the person being at fault. 5. Some people are so delicate that when gratification is received spiritually, or in prayer, they immediately experience a lust that so inebriates them, and caresses their senses, that they become as it were engulfed in the delight and satisfaction of that vice, and this experience continues passively with the other. Sometimes these individuals become aware that certain impure and rebellious acts have taken place. The reason for such occurrences is that since these natures are, as I say, delicate and tender, their humors and blood are stirred up by any change. These persons also experience such feelings when they are inflamed with anger, or are agitated by some other disturbance or affliction. 6. Sometimes too, in their spiritual conversations or works, they manifest a certain sprightliness and gallantry on considering who is present, and they carry on with a kind of vain satisfaction. Such behavior is also a byproduct of spiritual lust, in the way we here understand it, which generally accompanies complacency of the will. 7. Some spiritually acquire a liking for other individuals that often arises from lust rather than from the spirit. This lustful origin will be recognized if, on recalling that affection, there is remorse of conscience, not an increase in the remembrance and love of God. The affection is purely spiritual if the love of God grows when it grows, or if the love of God is remembered as often as the affection is remembered, or if the affection gives the soul a desire for God, if by growing in one the soul grows also in the other. For this is a trait of God's Spirit, the good increases with the good, since there is likeness and conformity between them. But when the love is born of this sensual vice, it has the contrary effects. As the one love grows greater, the other lessens, and the remembrance of it lessens too. If the inordinate love increases, then, as will be seen, the soul grows cold in the love of God, and because of the recollection of that other love, forgets Him, not without feeling some remorse of conscience. On the other hand, as the love of God increases, the soul grows cold in the inordinate affection, and comes to forget it. For not only do these loves fail to benefit each other, but, since they are contrary loves, the predominating one, while becoming stronger itself, stifles and extinguishes the other, as the philosophers say. Hence our Savior proclaimed in the Gospel, "That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit." John 3-6, that is, love derived from sensuality terminates in sensuality, and the love that is of the Spirit terminates in the Spirit of God, and brings it increase. And this, then, is the difference between these two loves, which enables us to discern one from the other. 8. When the soul enters the dark night, all these loves are placed in reasonable order. This night strengthens and purifies the love that is of God and takes away and destroys the other. But in the beginning it causes the soul to lose sight of both of them, as will be explained. Chapter 5. Next video. Thanks.